Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about doubt, and I have Todd Lent with me. And Todd, you are a sound artist, amazing sound artist, making some amazing pieces that I'm going to do a meditation with as well in this week. But besides that, you are a meditation teacher, and you are an awakening guide working with the fetters. And what we're going to talk about today is, first of all, I would like to hear, about your history, about your life before awakening. And then I would like to hear a lot about how doubt was like really a stick in the wheel for you to see through self and to move forward in the fetter work. So if you start out by just talking about yourself, I would like to hear about your life, before and after awakening.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. So I guess going back to the beginning, doubt has probably been the one of the biggest driving factors in my life. Even as a little kid, some of my favorite books were books on, excuse me, why things are the way they are, the fact-based books. I know you talk about skeptical doubt and emotional doubt, and I was filled with both. And back then, as a little kid, I wanted to know how everything worked, and I think there was a sense of security that came about having an idea of being able to grasp onto something, being able to put things into boxes and feel like, okay, well, at least I know how that thing works, and there's some security there. And I kind of maintained that as I grew up. I always loved, sorry, it's early in the morning here and I'm still waking up.
I'm so grateful for you doing that. You have really been accommodating my European time zone. Thank you so much for that.
It's okay. I'm up at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning.
There you go. That's the joy.
But I had no doubt that it was the right thing to do.
Oh,
So, yeah. So growing up, I wasn't as much of a trivia buff as some people, but I loved having this kind of collection of knowing how things worked. And in some cases, it was actually as a way of solidifying a position of identity. So, for instance, in my 20s, when I became a vegan and I started doing animal rights stuff, I committed to memory this list of facts about factory farming and health and all these different things, so that I had this like satchel of information to use to counteract any arguments, or and it was to give that sense of at least I know I'm right, and there's something here that is unquestionably true, and you are wrong, but I'm going to educate you on that. And so there was always that looking to be in the know, or to not have doubt, because there's never been in my time in my life where I really didn't. I mean, my family was fairly religious. They were Eastern Orthodox growing up, and I never understood it. I never bought into it. I remember when I was a really little kid, I memorized the Lord's Prayer, and I was like it was like I was reciting it because I knew it would bring yeah, I did the good thing, but it never meant anything to me. There was no connection. And so I've been kind of agnostic my entire life about everything, and not having any fixed belief or fixed place to land on led to a lot of anxiety. And so by the time I was 18 or so, I started developing very serious anxiety disorders. I became agoraphobic to the point where I was having panic attacks leaving the house. They came into smaller and smaller. My safe zone became smaller and smaller. I started having panic attacks in the house, and I had social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, you name it. And it was there. And then there was also depression and things that went with that before and during. And it was actually when I discovered Buddhism in college. So I was early 20s, and meditation. And I kind of picked up on that more so than any other. I think I felt internally that there was something more resonant there, and it wasn't as much a belief that I was taking on in a religious way as it was I felt the change in my body when I read these, the Zen books and these different things. There was just such an openness there and a resonance to something familiar and real. And it was through the teachings of anatta, the no self, and through the meditation practices, I was able to completely, turn around the anxiety and the depression, and it's been amazing. But still, there was always that feeling of uncertainty, that feeling of vacillating over the years between being really devoutly Buddhist and then completely secular and atheist. And there was just like I would be really into something and then I go completely the opposite direction. So it was always a pendulum swinging. And then there was always this kind of doubt as to, am I wasting my life? Am I not? Should I just be doing this thing? Should I be doing that? And so like it was like a constant thing. And then when I got to the point where the awakening journey has been such a long, protracted thing over the course of 20 years that has not been linear in any way, shape, or form. So there were insights along the way, some of which seemed to be insights, and others which were, I think, in retrospect, going back, it's like, oh, that was actually maybe a pretty big opening, or there was something there that I just didn't put into context. And so I went through LU back in 2021, and that when I started out being guided, I had a pretty good sense of no self, I think, at that point. And my guide later told me that when she picked me up, because at LU, you answer a number of questions before you start so that the guide can see where they feel like you are in the process, what your background is and all of that, to see if they can, resonate with you and if they want to work with you or not. And my guide later told me that when she read my initial answers, she felt like I was, seeing no self at that point and thought I was going to be a very easy, just in and through. 9 months later, we were still working. Much to her chagrin, but I give her credit for sticking with me. And sorry, this early morning thing.
It's hilarious.
So,
That's hilarious.
So, but the thing was, the reason that it took me that long was because I was so filled with doubt throughout the whole process. There were, some of it was based on expectations, because I had heard such exalted explanations of what it's like to see through the self or to have an awakening. And I was thinking, well, I haven't had that, I haven't had this flush of being one with everything in cosmic consciousness and, whatever. And there were some things that she had mentioned, she said she would never ask me to take on any beliefs, but there were a couple things where it felt like I was having to go beyond my, my comfort. And so there was a lot of pushback on that. And so constantly questioning what I had experienced. And the big thing is comparing what I experienced to the the descriptions of other people's experiences. And so even like working with the fetters, once I got there, I made the comment before that it would have been so much more comfortable for me if, like, when a fetter breaks, if all of your hair falls out or your skin turns green or something where it's just like absolutely undeniable that that was the thing that just happened. Because otherwise there's always that, well, I heard this other person describe this other thing that's well, I don't think I quite get that, but I have this thing. Or, is this feeling of openness the same as that feeling of openness that they're talking about? Is this, and so there are always so many ways of talking myself out of my own experience and trusting my own experience, that I really bound myself into these infinite loops of stasis. I couldn't break out of it because there was no way to completely detach from the experience and see both from some, third vantage point or something. So that took a lot of work before I, eventually recognized that, yes, what I was experiencing was what was being talked about. And then even after that, there was actually a period where, when I was working with Christiane Mickelberger on 4 and 5, there was question whether maybe I had to look back into 1 for a while. And I went back to double check that there was really nothing there, because the doubt still hadn't fully left, because I was still hearing things that she said or other people said they sounded so definitive and so clear cut. And because I had these series of gradual shifts and not some big fireworks explosion moment that some people have, that led me to be like, well, maybe it didn't. I don't know. If you say it didn't, you're a better expert than I am. So, there's always that doubting of internal conviction, that doubting of my own experience. And it took a long time. I wish that I had your methodology for working with doubt specifically, because in LU, they would just say, when you see through self, all the doubt goes along with it. And, Christiana says, if you see through the first fetter, the next two go with it. And I think in my case, that was really not true.
It's not my experience either. It's not my experience either. My experience is that yes, there's something about the identification and the non-identification when that falls in the first fetter. There's definitely something, like a trickle down effect that affects the doubt and affects the habits that we have. But I also see that there's a huge difference between thinking, which is the first fetter, the identification with the thinking, and then the identification with the feelings, which is the second fetter. And when, if you are very cerebral and you have a lot of skeptical doubt, where everything is about thinking, then your starting point is in your mind, and you have absolutely there's no way for you to feel if what you're experiencing is right, if it feels, if it's a body yes body no thing, because there's no connection. Everything happens here, and you cannot think yourself into it. You said that where you talk about that doubt that you had in your experience, because you kept comparing with other people and kept thinking that but this is not what I think they are. I mean, it's just in the mind, everything. You have absolutely no way of connecting and feeling that, how it feels.
No, and it was being in a mental checkmate all the time, because there was no way that you could think yourself out of it without also creating the opposite position. That it's just, it's like pinging back and forth between two mirrors. There's just it's an infinite loop.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the closest thing, when I was working through there, my guide had mentioned, essentially she was telling me about the body yes, body no. However, the way that I was interpreting it from her was that, she said that it was, if it's true versus false.
Mm.
And I had a real problem with that because I had a real issue with believing anything is universally true or not. And so I'd be like, well, okay, so I have this open, spacious feeling in my body. That's great. Something feels right there, but I don't know if that's true or if that's just my reaction to, because of any of these other causes and conditions that led to that. And so I had a real issue about taking it on at that rate. And it was actually conveniently one of the things that led to the final dropping away of, the first fetter and all of that, was that I had a video talk with her, and in the talk it came out that I don't know what is true. I will never know what is true. There is nothing that I can say for certainty is true. And that felt, oddly enough, very true. And, I had this great body, yes, open sensation to that. And then it was like, I think the next day it was one of those weird synchronous things where she had sent me a link to somebody's, it was actually to Judy Cohen's blog, not blog. She sends out like a newsletter, and I had never heard of her. And so she had sent me her newsletter. I read one of them, and she had a link to these Robert Saltzman sessions that she had done with him. And it was like, I don't know, 10 days of these videos or something. I had never heard of Robert Saltzman. So I clicked on and I started watching one of his videos. And at some point during one of them, he said that there are things that nobody knows, that nobody will ever know. And, basically that's okay. And when I heard that, just this weight just dropped, and it just felt like, oh, right. Yeah. It's okay to give up that constant searching for certainty and
grasping of
knowledge.
the mind.
Constant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was just like, things just opened up from there. So that was huge.
So how was the journey from that and then into the body? Because I know that it's been quite a journey for you to get into the body and to recognize what a body yes, body no is, because that obviously again is so tied in with doubt. Like people normally say to me, but I can talk myself into a piece of chocolate cake. That's a very, very body yes. It's like, so how did you do that part of the journey?
It's funny because there was a part of me that has always been very intuitive based, and I would go on gut feeling. So there was, as long as I can remember, I've always had these feelings of, oh, that's, I shouldn't do that thing because like there's like a premonition there that like, oh, I don't know, that something about that feels wrong, or that, this feels really good. So when she was telling me about the true false feeling, I recognized that sense in the body, and I could feel that. But again, I didn't fully trust it. And so it was really not as much at that point about feeling the sensations in the body as it was about having faith or trusting the fact that they were actually telling me something useful and helpful, and that I could act on them freely. And then the mind took a long time to warm up to that idea. And as because we have been working together on this stuff for a bit, I did have, still probably do have, a good amount of trauma, body issue stuff from the past. There was a big disconnect with the body in other ways. So like I did this, I have mentioned to you, but this was maybe, I don't know, had to have been at least 8 or 9, maybe 10 years ago now. I did this thing, I think they called it network spinal chiropractic. And one of the things was this, I forget what they call it now. It was like a somatic body breathing thing. And you would lay on a table and you would picture like a thread or of energy or something coming into, you know, the chest and then coming out through the stomach, and you're kind of like flossing these different centers, and you raise your chest and lower your stomach and vice versa. And it took me months before I could even move my chest. I literally could not feel those muscles at all. I had no way of accessing them. And then eventually that started to open up. But still, you know, even I stopped doing that, and then things got progressively, you know, more and more disconnected again. So this has actually been a more recent thing of really embracing the feelings of the body yes and body no, and really being able to just trust them, because the big thing is, when, like you've said, when you're in the body, you're not in the mind. And you stop running all of those hypothetical calculations, all of the possibilities that just wind you up in circles. And by doing that, things not only seem to clarify in terms of what feels like the right or the wrong thing to do, but you don't have the identification with all of the selfing that's happening when you're up in your mind. Things are just good, you know, as they are. You can just be in the body and it feels, oh yeah, okay, no, this is really good right now. I don't have to think about whatever's, you know, going on in the future. If it's something where I am on the fence as to whether to do this thing tomorrow or not, feeling into that and really just having that sense of trust that it has been correct so many times over the past, and that it's, you know, the thing is either going to happen or not going to happen. And there's that same relaxing of the illusion of control or the illusion of choice, like that relaxes with that, because that's all just mind stuff.
It's such a good point. I usually use the picture of you know, the dog and the rabbit, where that optical illusion where you can either see the dog or you can see the rabbit. You can never see both at the same time. And it's a bit the same with the mind and with the body sensation, that you can't have both at the same time. Either you are in your head and you're thinking, and that will always be about something, about the future, about the past, about things that need to be different, so about, or you are in the body where it's just with the sensation that is present right now. And in the beginning, I should say that ping pong going back and forth all the time, where you have a sensation, and then the mind goes like, is that a correct sensation, or could this be any different? Do I know this from the past? And where it's just completely diverting the attention and the issue from where the answer actually lies. If I just may ask you, because I know you've been guiding a lot of people, and you have obviously that tendency to attract people that then have issues with doubt. That's usually how it works. How are you helping them? What tools are you using, or did you use yourself from becoming aware of whether, you know, it's the bunny or it's the dog or the rabbit that you're looking at?
Yeah, honestly, it's maybe not shocking, but it has been surprising on my side to see how similar of patterns people are in to what I went through. And so the first thing I usually do is to actually get right to their expectations and ask them, what are you expecting out of this process? What does it look like? What does awakening look like? What are you envisioning? And then basically disabuse them of all of that as much as I possibly can right from the beginning, because most of the time it is as wildly fantastical as what I was, you know, picturing. And even that, you know, even after getting through a lot of those, they will still come back in our dialogues, that there's still some holdover of, well, you know, but I've heard this person say that once you're awake, it's like living on an LSD trip all the time or whatever. It's like these things still, they're so romantic and you know, tantalizing for a lot of people, especially a lot of people come to this process through depression, anxiety, suffering. And so you're looking for a way of getting out of that. And absolutely, the idea of, floating on a lotus for the rest of your life seems, why would you not want that? And so there is a certain amount of escapism there. And so constantly bringing back to the fact that no, even after you finish all of this, you are still going to have uncomfortable things, in your life that you otherwise would not have chosen. It's not going to be a perfect, blissful rainbow forever. You're going to be able to deal with it because you're going to have equanimity, and, it's going to be okay that things are the way they are. But, there has to be some sense of scaling down of these expectations to begin with.
And sorry.
No.
Go on. No, go on. Please finish.
And then, part of it is also looking at wait.
Sorry.
Lost the train of thought for a second. All right. No, so yeah, so they so we scale down the expectations a bit, and then there is so much mind identification for most people who are in the same place of perpetual doubt. And what I've found is I've also been inquiring into how much body awareness they actually have. And maybe not surprisingly, there is often very little. And so I've been coming up with some, body awareness meditations and things to get people sensitized back into it. Because the one thing that I think I was aware of personally, and not aware that everybody wasn't, like, all throughout, was that not everybody realizes that emotions have a strong physical component to it. I mean, we say emotion is just a physical sensation plus a thought or label about it. And for a lot of people, that is a very new concept. The fact that you can really feel an emotion in the body in some way is really new information. So getting people to really connect with the experience, indirect experience, to see what they're feeling without labeling these things immediately, and seeing how similar some emotional sensations are to others. And it's just the label that is, making one into the other, essentially. And so sensitizing into the body, getting out of those perpetual thinking loops. And I also have tools that we work with deconstructing the reliance on thought, or the belief on thought, or the identification with thought, because so much of it is well, I know these facts because I've learned these facts and I know them to be true, and you take that on full faith. And so I've got some things that I've developed to help people start to see through that and break that down, and realize that so much of what you take to be absolute certainty about your personal history, your the world around you, all of that is just inherited knowledge, as I call it. Like, it's something that somebody gives you and you take it on and just assume it to be true without actually investigating it. And there's really no way to tell in this moment if anything is true. And that starts to break down that constant reliance on conceptual thought.
Yeah, two things. The first thing is you have some really, really amazing body meditations, and see, hear, feel, and you have so many amazing things on your channel, which is unfettered mindfulness. And I'm gonna link to your channel in the description of the video here, because it's really a treasure chest of amazing stuff you got there. If we could circle back to the part where about the escapism which people they come with, because I have experienced that so many times, whether it's been patients or it's been in group settings, that that people, they come with something that they do not want anymore, like anxiety or depression or chronic disease or anything. The reason why they seek is because there's something that they do not want, and the first thing that they are going to learn is that is never going to disappear. It's how do you break that news to people that are starting guiding, that is coming like, Todd, I want to be awake because I don't want to be me anymore. How do you do that?
Honestly, well, with honesty, I try to reassure them that there is nothing in that sensation in the body that is going to hurt or kill them. They can handle it. And even in small doses, we'll start for a couple seconds at a time and get used to that, and then build up the confidence. Because again, speaking from experience, I had so many years where just tuning into the body, as soon as I could be watching TV, and as soon as I tuned into like the chest area, there would be so much sadness in there and such a feeling of just contraction and sorrow that was like, oh nope, I'm not going there, right back up to the head, or even when there was less mind identification, it was much more, well, I'm focusing out there on, the world around me, or on sounds or whatever, because it was like being inside the body is just way too uncomfortable. And so let's focus out on the sense experience, because the senses are beautiful. It's so nice. It's so light to just be fully absorbed with a tree and really, taking in all the minutia. Meanwhile, the body was just kind of dangling below the senses somewhere, and just, bringing, it was like a transportation vessel to bring the sense, organs from one place to another without really being embodied at all. And so, I'm very thankful for having worked with you on this stuff, because I have such a better sense of being in the body. And you really do, all the only thing you have to do is just to have the sense of self-love and compassion, to have that the strength in your own ability to sit with the discomfort for a little while. And it really is bearable, and it can be more than bearable. It can actually even be like pleasurable, in that you feel it, and you feel it change, and you feel this openness around it, and this space around it, and you really can hold these things. So that's one of the other things that I've been recommending to people, is being able to have that initial space around the thing without maybe necessarily going deeply into it. I do have, since you mentioned the channel, I do have a video on there of 7 tools for working with pain. And even though when I recorded that, it was initially about physical pain specifically, really all of those tools work for emotional pain as well. You can completely turn it around to the physical sensations in the body from any sort of emotional discomfort as well. And, you can approach it from the outside, holding the space for that discomfort, and then, gradually, if it's more comfortable, penetrate it and permeate it, and really see what's there, what it really is that you're so afraid of. Mm-hmm. And it kind of self-liberates. Yeah. And, just having the courage to come back to that is what's needed.
Yeah.
And I think that's the nice thing about LU or any of these things where you have a guide, is because you have a support person there. It's scary to do these things on your own, because you don't know. And having somebody there with you, kind of holding your hand, being like, no, it's okay. It's okay to do that. You'll be all right. And I'm here. If something comes up, just let me know. It's perfectly okay.
Yeah. What we're talking about here is the second fetter. So we are assuming that people that are here now listening to this, they have already seen through self. So the identification with thought, they have realized that a thought is just a thought. It's not truth. An opinion can never, ever be truth. It's just an opinion. So whatever is going on in the mind, everybody that listens to this know that okay, that is one level of identification that is no longer there. But obviously, like you said, that you also experienced, that you had like that back and forth going from, even though that you had seen through self and you knew there is no I, there's no intrinsically taughtness anywhere, you know, there's just, it's just thoughts connected up on, you know, put on top of sensory experiences, and that is what we pretend is a thought. How do you manage that when then with people? Because in my experience, what happens when somebody has issues with doubt is that, like you said, they start to come into the body and feeling what is happening in the body and going like ooh, 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 and then out and back up to the head. How do you do that? Is there a specific meditation that you use? Is it direct pointing about the first theta, or do you work with the second theta, or is it impossible to say that there's, you know, I know that it's impossible to say there's one single way of doing it, but what is like your go-to staple, you know?
So far, well, it's tough because I do work, excuse me, fairly intuitively when it comes to these things. So I try to feel out the person directly and to where they are, and then usually the right kind of tool will come up for them. So it's not necessarily a cut and paste situation, but you know, for the most part, I'm working with people who like on LU there, if, you know, actually my old guide tends to, she gets frustrated with people who have a lot of doubt and go on like me. And so me and Vince are the two that usually get those people sent to us. So she'll be like, can you, you know, take on this person because they have like major doubt issues. So they come to me or Vince, and we, you know, it's still at this point, most of them have usually had some sort of glimpse of seeing through the self, but maybe it's not a full thing. And it's really just kind of walking them through the same sort of things that I've mentioned, where we're because it's hard to say for sure that they are completely done because they vacillate so much back and forth, and it's like, okay, well, is this conceptual or do you really experience this? And I think especially when people aren't connected to their body, it's a really hard thing to determine whether you're just conceptually understanding something or whether it's a really true felt sense. And then sometimes you'll hear from somebody like, oh, you know, I had this experience and it was like the most undeniably true thing, that it's like, okay, that's what we're talking about, right? Like feeling into like there's just absolute conviction. That's what we're looking for. It's not, well, yeah, it totally makes sense. I've heard that there's no self and I can't find, you know, I look for a self here and I look for a self here and I can't find it. Um and yeah, and like, you know, Christiana has said that there's the lack of evidence is not necessarily the proof of like seeing through self, you know, like just because you've seen it many times or not found it many times doesn't mean that you are through. There has to be a conclusive real understanding that comes
Yeah,
with it.
it's also things which are very, you know, easy to pick up on, you know, in language, you know, that I can't see it, which is located in the head. And I don't think there's anything which is located in the head. That there's such a difference between somebody saying that and then going like, you know, I just feel it, you know, I can't explain what it is. I can just feel it. That's like, then they have landed in the body, and then then there's like, that's exactly what we're talking about. That's exactly where we're supposed to be experienced. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So is there any, I know that you have a lot of different guidings and pointings and meditations, and you have so much amazing stuff on your channel. Is there anything that you would recommend for second theta stuff when it is like about doubt?
Yeah, so and there is a lot more coming. My channel is very new, and so I have a lot more coming in the future that I haven't had a chance to record yet. But Yeah. So, the see, hear, feel technique, which I wish I could take credit for, but I absolutely cannot. That was Shinzen Young, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. And it was so helpful for me, um, because it brings you into very clear awareness of bodily sensations, uh, external and internal, visual and oral sensations, and thoughts, included in this, where you can experience these things without the labels and really become very absorbed into them. And so those have been, I think, hugely helpful for me. I'm actually going to be recording shortly, the one that I talked about regarding, knowledge and breaking down our, uh, what we think we know. I've given it to people on the forum, because on the forum, we're primarily writing back and forth, and then some of us will occasionally do, video chats, every now and then too. So I haven't recorded this one yet. I've just, given it to people in text. So I am going to record that and put it on the channel, as kind of a guided exploration for people um, to really observe um, their own conviction of their own thoughts. And that can be really destabilizing too, because, we're taking the ground out from under you in a way. But the, the surprising thing is that it's actually really liberating to know that you don't know anything and you can't know anything. And that's really good. Like, if you had told me that 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I would have thought you were nuts. But it's absolutely the case. Back then it was like, knowledge is power. And,
Yeah.
and I, I think it's also super amazing on a practical level. Like, there's, on a day-to-day world, we're talking through this incredible technology that is here because, there is a sort of scientific knowledge that has been gradually expanding, and I'm not, discounting any of that. But when it comes to these deeper things of seeing through the sense of self, of awakening in general, the mind is the wrong tool for the job. We just, if you're building a computer, yes, it's really good to know how all of these circuits work and how everything goes together. If you're trying to figure out who you really are, the mind is just not the tool for that. It's going to keep bringing you into wrong directions and blind alleys. For that, you have to just keep coming back to direct experience, keep removing the labels, and keep coming back into the body and seeing what's really there in the moment.
Yeah, completely. I mean, if you work with fear, anger, guilt, and shame, you can't use your head for anything. It's like it's as you say, it's the wrong tool. It's the wrong tool. So how would you use direct pointing for pick which one you want to direct point towards: fear, anger, guilt, and shame? Which one? And how would you choose to make people look at it? Because, for example, if we say shame is a huge one for the majority of people. Shame is tied into low self-worth and low self-esteem. So, and normally people, they enjoy saying, I have low self-worth and I have low self-esteem. And when I point out that, well, you don't really, you have an underlying belief about shame, then it's just like, no. Because it's like way too deep. It's way too painful to look at. How do you use direct pointing for that?
Yeah, and again, this is where it's really different case by case when I'm talking to people. I try to feel into the dialogue that we're having as to, because you're so right that we get these kind of addictions to these uncomfortable feelings or stories about ourselves, and it can become a weirdly cloyingly sweet thing to have the identification of a depressed person, or of just not being good enough. And again, speaking from personal experience, I had been through all of that for many years. There is something that's very comfortable about the misery, and there's something home-like about that, and there's something that's very scary about losing that identification and losing that security of of a limiting belief of some sort, and knowing that, limiting beliefs keep you safe from trying. If you think that everything is going, you're going to fail, well, then it keeps you from having to actually step out of your comfort zone and do anything. And so I think there's actually a lot of benefit, I think, to also going the route of the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. I think is actually really useful for people, especially if they're dealing with depression or really deep issues like that, because again, it brings you back to being able to hold that space without reacting to it or pushing from it. It allows you to become more aware of these thoughts that are running, because most people who are dealing with these things, there is so much internal monologue about the issues that you don't even realize that they're going on. You don't realize that you don't have to identify with them. And, you don't realize that, like you said, that they're based on some really old assumptions or really old, feelings of guilt or shame or fear or anger. And so basically, I try to turn them back, depending on what they say to me and where they're coming from. We'll try to look into what those limiting beliefs might have been, and what comes up. I'll ask them, like, think about one of these issues and what comes up in the body. How does that feel? Where does it express itself in the body in this moment? And then have them describe. And a lot of times it'll start out very vague and nebulous, and it's like, well, I feel sick, or I feel something. It's like, no, deeper. Yeah, I feel unhappy. Yeah. It's just like, no, there's something. And it's like, no, go deep. Be very specific. Like, come at it with the curiosity of a small child or an anthropologist or a scientist, somebody who's like really dispassionately observing this thing out of just, what is that? What am I feeling? What am I running away from? And going right into, well, okay, so there's tingling, or there's tension here in the chest, and maybe there's some tightness in the throat. There's a bubble here. There's something. Good. Now, can you be with that sensation for a minute? Where is the label? How does that attach to what you think of as being, the feeling of depression or sadness or whatever? Where does that label get attached to it? How is that affecting anything in the real world? How is that being, and just really have them explore it and sort of see through the facade.
Yeah, super important point about the label. And I would like to circle back to that where we have a sensory experience about something, and then we put a label on, and then the label say this is anxiety, or this is depression, or this is sadness, or this is grief, or it's the label that says that it is one or the other. So when you go into the body and you really, take off the label and just really sense what is happening in the body, then you start to unpack that the physical experience of what you thought was anxiety or depression or something else is not what you would think it is. Could you talk something about that? So it's just
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as going back to my personal history as a musician, I used to have, like, when I went to school for music, I went for classical guitar, and that was during a very anxious period of my life. So I was having agoraphobia back then. Not great for getting on stage and performing solo guitar in front of people. And, a little bit of a problem. And so, I went for composition too. And I really liked the idea of being behind the scenes, just composing the music and then having other people do it. But there is a performance component when you go for music, and you have to do these things. So before I would go out, I would be so anxious. My fingers would go numb, like they would turn like yellow. Like I had, like, all of the blood flow was like retracting into the body. And again, super not helpful for playing classical guitar when you can't feel your fingers. Becomes quite a spiral of bad playing, really. But the thing was, my point of going into that was just, in general, you know, I wish I had had this framing back then as much, or I wish I could have used it as much. There is stage fright. The feeling of anxiety before going on performance is essentially the same feeling of excitement about going into a performance. You really can't tell that, except for the fact that I go, okay, my fingers are cold, they're numb, I might screw up, I must be anxious, that this feeling is anxiety. And then, you know, it amps up more. But if I had just turned it around and been like, oh, I can't wait to go out in front of those people and play this piece that I've been practicing for months, and, you know, or whatever, it would have been a completely different thing. It was all based on label. Yeah. And we do that throughout our day, that there are so many things that that just, you know, driving down the street, and I feel like our physical emotional sense is like a constantly changing kaleidoscope of sensations that most of the time we're really not aware of. Okay. And, you know, you go down a part of the street and all of a sudden you feel like something really uncomfortable, and you don't necessarily know why it is, but there's an immediate push to get out of that. But really observing, like, well, what really is that sensation? And then that discomfort, notice what label you're attaching to it in that moment. Is this a fearful sensation? Well, what is it really? Is there, you know, is it a feeling of feeling bad for something or somebody else that you're seeing? Is it whatever it is? Take off the label and just see what's really there, what's really behind that label. And it's almost two steps down, because, you know, first, we're not even aware that it's happening most of the time. And then when we do become aware of it, we're just aware of the label of it.
Exactly.
And then, yeah. And then we really have to get below the label to see what we're even sticking that label onto.
Yeah. Yeah. And also be open to whatever sensory experience you have might not be what you thought that you would have. If, you know, you have this label, and that, which might be, you know, anxiety, let's say, fear of death, you know, and that's a label. And then when you really look into the sensation in the body, it's like not connected at all. It's like completely not connected at all. You have the audio that you have on your channel about pain. I really, really love it. I think it's so good. And one of the examples that you have in it is that if you've been to the gym and you've been working out, and your muscles have that lovely tiredness after, you know, a rough workout, you're completely fine with the sensation that you have in the body, with the pain that you have in the body. You might even feel a little bit proud of what you did in the gym today, you know, because of how the body feels. But if you wake up during the night with exactly the same feeling, then panic will just, you know, happen right away, and you're going to call for an ambulance.
Yeah, I mean, I used to have that. So, you know, back in the day, back in high school, you know, I went through my whole weed smoking phase and all of that, and then stopped all of that for a long time. And then a few years ago, I was taking care of my mom. She had a lot of health problems, and she had a medical marijuana prescription. And so I, you know, tried it again. And the same thing where, because of my past history of, you know, my father died of a heart attack at 43, his father died of a heart attack at 45. So I've always had this kind of concern about my heart and potential heart attacks. And then it would get to this point where, like, if I would just have like a little weed, as soon as I felt the heart race increase, it would be immediately like, oh, I must be having a heart attack. There must be something. And so you get into these things. And the same thing happened with panic attacks. You get this constant spiral of feeling a sensation in the body, and then, you know, oh my God, my blood pressure feels like it's going high. I must be having a heart attack. My blood pressure is going even higher now. I'm definitely having a heart attack. And it's just this infinite loop of you know, of this feedback loop of worsening sensations. But ultimately, you know, it's just the misapplied contextualization of it. You know, you can remember, oh no, this is just THC. It raises your you know, your heart rate. It's whatever, or I'm spiraling mentally and having this anxiety reaction and bringing it back. And that's why I am a fan of the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy approach, because it does give you that ability to step back from those thoughts when you're in those kind of spirals of anxiety. Yeah. But yeah, I feel like there was another point that I was kind of inching towards there for a moment, but I've lost the thread. So if it comes back, I'll get back there.
Might come back. I'm also thinking that everything we're talking about now is so super relevant regarding doubt, because doubt is in the body. It's the only way when we can really get in contact with the doubt that we have is when we connect with the body and feel that in the body there's never doubt. There's never ever any doubt. It's measurable. If you want to do this or you want to do that. I mean, pupil dilation and contraction, perspiration in the hands, in elevated heart rate. Everything is measurable. If you want to do it, if you don't want to do it. So there's no doubt anywhere. Only in your mind. It's only in your mind that the doubt is, because in your body it's very, very clear that yeah, I really want to do that, and nope, don't want to do that. And that's why I think it's super important to talk about that disconnect that we can have with a sensory experience in the body, and the label that we attach to it. That is so important to become aware of that bloody label. Really, really look at it, because the label belongs in the first theta. That is the identification with the thought, where underneath you have the body experience. And yeah,
I love that distinction so much. Yeah, and again, personal experience. There could be, if I am choosing, well, if the option comes up whether to do a thing or not, and there is a feeling in the body of like a very clear body no for not doing something, it's then that because you're right, there is no doubt in the body in that moment. It takes the thought coming in and saying, oh, but you should really do that thing for that person because they've done this for you, or it's your obligation as a and you have and there are all these reasons that come in that then seem so uncomfortable, because it's really not the right thing that you should be doing, or it's definitely not what you would want to do, and it's going against something really central. But it's that guilt is so pervasive that it's so easy to rely back onto those old stories to force us into doing things that we really otherwise would not want to do and often should not do.
Exactly. And it's why I think it's so important to work with the second theta and really be aware of the emotional indicator of fear, anger, guilt, and shame, because like you say, you can have a very, very clear body no in that I don't want to do this. But then when you have an underlying belief about guilt, where you feel guilty about your choices, about you prioritizing your needs, then you have the tendency to completely override the very, very clear body no and go with the guilt, going with back into the mind and relying on the mind's rumination about why you need to do what you don't want to do, and then we tend to do it, which the more we do that, disconnect from the very, very clear sensation that we have in the body, and go into the label and do based on the underlying belief of fear, anger, guilt, and shame, we completely lose ourselves. And then it ends up with being like exactly what you say, that there's such a contraction in the chest that you can't even feel the floss when it's made, that there's such a pain when you connect with the stomach, or you connect with your pelvic floor, or anywhere in the body that you connect with, then you feel, oh my God, I have such a migraine, I'm not gonna feel into that. Yeah. And it's always because we have made the disconnect from the body where there's a very, very clear yes or no. And then we go along with the fear, anger, guilt, and shame and do what that dictates us instead.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, exactly like you said, the discomfort, I mean, it's another of those feedback loops where I feel a body no, it feels uncomfortable, but instead I feel so much guilt for not doing this thing. That feels even more uncomfortable than the body no sensation. So of course I'm going to do the thing to alleviate that sensation. Or if you don't do the thing, and then like sometimes the mind will still come on, and there'll be like the relief of not doing the thing. That's the kind of body yes of, okay, you did the right thing by not doing it. But then the mind can still come in, and that guilt can be so strong that it creates another layer of that, oh, but you should have done that, and you should feel really bad for not having done that. And then that creates more of that, and so it keeps us from wanting to ever touch into that body, because no matter what we do, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. It always causes some sort of discomfort at that point, as long as we're constantly giving voice to those guilt feelings and really embodying that. And so it keeps us, above the neck, so to speak, and out of the body, because it's just, there's always some sort of discomfort there.
And I know for sure that when somebody's sitting and listening to this, they're going to say yes, but that is identification with the first fetter. We're back to identifying with the first fetter. When the first fetter falls, then there will be no doubt. Then there will be no, underlying belief anymore, because that is all just identification. So why work with the second fetter at all? Why dive into that? Why creating, all that space for all that when it's just about mind identification?
I mean, for me, from what I have seen from other people at LU who have gone through the gate, both, people who guide or other people, doubt is still an ever-present thing that comes in and out. Like there's without giving away state secrets, so to speak, like there are people who go through, LU, who guide, and then still can be thrown off their, if you have the wrong word come from somebody that is perceived to be, authoritative on something, it can cause a sense of doubt to reemerge, because we don't a lot of times deal with those underlying core issues of the fear, anger, guilt, and shame. And so because of that, even if that there's no self, that there's no mind identification, so to speak, in that way, these are somehow underlying processes that still make such a difference in our experience of the world. And even seeing people go through, I mean, like, Kevin Shanelek still talks about, and I think it was in his interview with Angelo, where even after, the sixth fetter has fallen, people will still doubt, well, was that it? Was that really the thing? And so there is doubt popping up at every level along the way. And I really think we have to deal with these underlying emotional issues in order to be able to really settle in and to really be present without any of that mind identification. Or yeah, it's a hard thing to describe in that way, but absolutely, it's something that just constantly needs to be looked into, either before or after, you've seen through the self.
Yeah. And it's also my experience that something like expectations or comparisons, that has multiple layers as well. There's like the first level layer where it's very, very easy to see through what expectation and comparison is about. That, okay, well, it's identification, and I can never ever compare, and there's nothing to expect ever. Very, very easy peasy, sorted, that's it. But then, like you say, then somebody at work or something can say something that is completely pushing into that underlying belief of the anger, guilt, and shame. And then expectation comes up, you know, a feeling about, oh, should I have done differently? Doubt about the expectation, or doubt about the comparison, you know, am I not just as good as Janice, you know, what the boss just said? Am I, you know, so that can come up, even though we know that there's no separate self, and the first feather has fallen and all of that, but because of the underlying belief, then there's still issue about doubt. And it's also why I find it so important to work at, really, really dive into, so we're not pushing it in front of us for when we come to the fourth and the fifth, because there's enough to deal with with the fourth and the fifth.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I wish I had known more about that and had done more about that before working with 4 and 5. But you know, everything worked out really well as it was.
Would you be okay talking about that? What, because I know that when you went to the fourth and fifth, just to clarify, the fourth is about desire, all the things you want, and the fifth is about ill will or aversion, all the things we don't want. So they're really very much connected. That they are very distinct. They're not the same. They're very, very distinct, and it's a very different underlying motivation for either one. So it's very important as well to go into depth with the fourth when it's about desire. What is the underlying motivation for that, and for the underlying motivation for ill will? But could you talk about how you experienced having to revisit again about doubt when you were working with the fourth and the fifth?
Yeah, well, I mean, on one level, you know, they do acknowledge that you're going to have weakening, most likely, of 4 and 5 as you're working with these things. And you never really know if they've broken until, you know, like Christiana says, you know, she never says that somebody has fully broken them usually until like the 8th has fallen, because it's always a possibility that they keep coming back. There were periods where I was doing it where there would be like months of almost no reactivity or no reactivity. And then something would trigger this really old, you know, wound, this really old frustration. And I could then, you know, it was great because then I would have something more to work with. And it was like, oh, here's the thing. And usually that would be like a really big opening afterwards. So that was always fantastic. But in one sense, I feel like the process would have probably been even easier and smoother had I not had so much of these underlying doubt baggages beforehand. Because again, remember, as I started going through that, there was also the period of going like, did I really see through the first fetter? Like, is there something there that I should be going back to? And then there was like the clarification of that, like, no, that's absurd. Like there, of course there's no, you know, I clearly have seen through that. But but still there were these, it was that old, you know, going back to those old issues of imposter syndrome or not being good enough, or, you know, there were all of these old patterns that sow those seeds of disbelief that say, well, this can't possibly be it. You couldn't possibly be, you know, this must be wrong. You must be, you know, whatever. And it's all of these old things that are constantly kind of derailing us back. But then the interesting thing is that on one hand, when I was doing the 4 and 5 inquiry, and the way that, you know, well, really that we all do it, is that you're sitting with those uncomfortable sensations, that primary sensation of, and you sit in the gap where it feels like it's, you know, we would normally do something to distract ourselves from it. And on one hand, I was able to be in the body enough to be able to sit with these things and feel this discomfort, and it worked. But on the other hand, even while I was doing that, I was still staying out of the body when I wasn't doing the inquiry, because anytime that I touched into it when I wasn't specifically doing the inquiry, it was very uncomfortable. Yeah. I will say the benefit of having gone through 4 and 5 before also really doing the deep body stuff is that there is now no reactivity to those feelings of sensation of sitting with the discomfort. So, when I go in, and if there is sorrow there, there isn't the push to immediately get away from it. If there's a feeling of guilt or shame or whatever, there's no immediate pushback from it. I can just sit with it and let it be, explore it. It's perfectly okay. I don't know if I would have been able to do that as well, just given my, basic proclivity history before 4 and 5. So, yeah. So on the one hand, I know I say that I wish I had known this stuff beforehand, and I do, but on the other hand, there was actually a good benefit to having 4 and 5 basically out of the way, so that I am more comfortable just being with it.
And then also the fetters are not linear. They are circular. So for you to work with the first fetter and the doubt, and then go to the fourth and the fifth, and going back to the doubt and more in the fourth and the fifth, it's like that deepening. And every time you deepen, other further along fetters are being touched with or tweaked a little bit, which makes it easier for then to work with the 6 about form, and 7 about formlessness, and it's just making everything so much easier. Working with it like that.
Yeah.
So what would you say that you used to really doubt that you don't doubt anymore?
Oh God. Well, I mean, the most obvious thing in terms of this stuff was, well, I guess 2 things would be, one, that the awakening is even possible in this life. There were large part of the time of my life, of my Buddhist, study, where it was like, well, maybe it's possible, but maybe it's going to be 1,000 lifetimes down the road. I don't know. Maybe it's not. And when I came across, especially LU, especially the Feder work, it was like, okay, is that really possible? Is that really a thing? Like there was still some skepticism there about, is it that easy? Like, can you really, you don't have to go join a monastery for the next 60 years and, maybe get a glimpse. So I think that has been a big thing, that, oh, it really does work. Like it really is at hand and completely available. And this is the incredible thing of the internet and, this kind of profusion of YouTube channels and things dealing with awakening, of LU, of the Feder model becoming bigger and bigger, because I think there are all these different avenues now for people to find something that really speaks to them. And I mean, I think that was a really huge one just in general. I would say also, I have really come to terms with the fact that I can trust the body yes, body no, and that these things really do. Thank you.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah. There was massive amounts of doubt about really being able to trust the sensations of the body, or the feeling in the body.
That is a huge one. Do you know what it was that did it, that made you really realize that, oh my goodness, I cannot use my head for anything that's looking good. I can only ever trust, a body sensation, moving me and just flowing me in the direction that I'm supposed to be. Do you know what, if it was like one thing, or what was it that made that shift for you?
I wish I could say there was just one definitive thing, but I think it's been a gradual, like everything in my life, it's just this gradual unfolding process. And so there were, because I had even decades ago that kind of intuitive sense that I would rely on and trust my gut. And I would always say that, if somebody asked me, even though I was so bound up in the head, if somebody asked me, I would usually say that I'm a very intuitive person. I'm a very, I follow my gut. To be truthful, I would follow my gut, or I would listen to the gut, and then fear, anger, guilt, and shame would drive me in a completely different direction most of the time. But I was aware of it being there and it pointing me to something. But I think it was like a whole combination of things, like because there's ironically, so there's the experiential side of things where you trust your gut. It turns out seemingly for the best. Yeah, you've gotten confirmation. You don't trust your gut. Things go horribly awry for a bit. Okay, maybe confirmation. But then also having that skeptical scientific mind, I would also read studies or, things on like what was it, the Iowa gambler
Yeah.
study and things like that, where it's like, oh yeah, the body really does know things long before the mind takes credit for it and decides that it made the decision or that it should do this thing or that thing.
It's so funny. The ego in the frontal lobe is like the last one to know. It's so funny. It's so funny. Yeah.
Exactly. So it was like a combination, I think, of all fronts of being like experiential and then having to directly target the skeptical scientific part of the brain that's like, oh, but what if? Well, okay, if and it's the same thing with seeing through the self. Like I think it can be helpful for people. This kind of jumps back 10 questions back in the other direction, but when dealing with people who have really a lot of skeptical mind-based identification, the fact that we do have a lot of books now about the neurology or in the neurobiology and neurochemistry and all of that about how our choices really are not being made by us, how there really is no inherent self in there, and how we can isolate some of these things to specific parts of the brain or whatever. For people who have a very skeptical science-based leaning like I did, that's really helpful to also just chisel away at that part of the belief too. So it's like,
see, I have written down, that's another one that I would like to hear about. What dogma or belief do you no longer hold? So yeah,
ooh,
you understand the question for sure.
no. I mean, a lot of them. There were there were periods in my life where I was very sort of ascetically Buddhist in a way. If I could have run off and joined a monastery, I absolutely would have. And there were times where I was very pleasure denying, completely trying to root out attachment in, the most austere ways possible. And so much about that version of Buddhism has left me at this point, that this is just such an experiential reality that is completely, I still love Buddhism, obviously. It still there's something about it that resonates, but it resonates as a toolkit, as a really profound philosophy for living your life without necessarily taking on all of the cultural baggage or all of the metaphysical things that may or may not be true. I don't know. Like I'm still okay being that. I call it perpetual agnosticism, just because I'm not going to come down on any side of anything because I truly don't know. And it's not a doubtful agnosticism. It's just this kind of openness of I truly don't know.
It's a part of not knowing that we talked about, which is sense better when you realize that you will forever be ignorant. You will never ever know everything. But it's also what you talked about with having that ascetic Buddhist philosophy that a lot of people that they do, because you're not alone in that. It is funny because one of the stories is about the Buddha doing that as well, and he realized, it doesn't work. He remembered, he was fasting and he was like completely, depriving himself of all kind of joy and pleasure. He didn't want anything to do with anything because that was like what was, trendy at the time. And then he remembered sitting under a tree, under a Bodhi tree, watching his dad, and he just had that feeling of joy, that feeling of enjoyment and pleasure, and realized that what he was doing, this is not the way. This is not the way. That was what really made me understand that being in a body and having all the pleasures that we have in a body and all the enjoyment that we have in a body, we're supposed to. For me to be in a body that is pleasurable to be in, and taking care of my body in a way so it's a lovely place to be. It puts me in a position to teach the Dharma and to be with enjoyment, and that in itself, just by mirror neurons, has its effect on other people. So yeah, but it's it's a very important point that you touch on, because a lot of people, they have that punishment idea. I do think, but that's just my personal opinion, I do think that that's more founded in Christianity than it's actually Buddhism, because Buddhism is very much about enjoyment and pleasure and being happy. And yeah,
I very much confused the having grown up in a Christian culture without specifically having, I rebelled against it as much as I could, especially in my teens, to every possible degree, but it was still so in the water, so to speak, that there's no way to not take some of that on as a foundational, even if you don't believe in the whole heaven and hell and all of that stuff, there's still a feeling of judgment. There's still a feeling of guilt and shame that is involved around so many things. And I think because there were different periods during my 20-year Buddhist journey as well, and so there were times where it was very much just like Zen, chopping wood, carrying water type Buddhism, and then there was also the like more austere versions where I would it was much more confusing monastic life with lay life. And feeling like, well, if they're taking these precepts and refraining from all of these things, I'm being ultra decadent by there's no reason I shouldn't be able to do that same thing, and I must have attachment to these things if I can't give them up like they're giving them up. And so something that I've been learning just recently really is that there is such it's okay to, like, it's possible to enjoy things without attachment to them. In my mind before, it was always, if you enjoyed something, there must be attachment to that thing, and if you don't enjoy something, there must be aversion to that thing. And that's really not the case. You can enjoy something while it's there and not be attached to it when it's not, or not really like something when it's there but not have to push it away. And that has been another.
So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's exactly, I think that is where the Feta work really puts it into perspective, because normally in Buddhism, when we talk about aversion and desire, it is very much like you say about, okay, so everything I enjoy, I shouldn't enjoy because I have an attachment to it, but realizing that about anatta, that there is no separate self, then there's no longer anyone to have an attachment to anything, and there's no longer a preference towards anything. It's just what is happening, and the body sensations are just like the Vedana, that are either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and it's just that pure being in it, which is always pleasurable. No matter if you're having a hot bath or a root canal, there's all that joy of experiencing is always there. And when there's no attachment to the self anymore, then it's just enjoyment and pleasure, no matter what it is.
I completely agree.
And in that doubt dissolves, in that there's no longer any doubt, because that ping pong between the mind and the body is no longer there. There's just the joy of experiencing, and whatever you're experiencing in the body is can be part of that joy of experiencing.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
sorry.
No.
No.
There was something there, and then it kind of it'll come back.
If you, when you watch the video, remember, then we're just making another video talking again. I love
That'll
this.
be great.
This is
That'll be
great.
perfect.
Great.
That'll be perfect.
As I'm circling back to a topic we talked about 20 questions ago, the connection between doubt and self-worth. When did you have that realization that doubt is tied into self-worth, or maybe not like intellectually understanding it, but feeling that there is a very, very deep connection between those two?
Honestly, I hadn't put it into that context, but I think I've been aware of that for a long time. That because I mean, from the time that I was in like elementary school, probably maybe before, there were always issues of self-worth. And I don't know really where they came from, because on one hand, as a little kid, I was told that I was gifted and, had no shortage of praise, in certain ways, but I still took on this complete feeling of being this unworthy imposter and everything. And it wasn't that I would necessarily attribute, the doubt to that, but looking back, it was so clear that those feelings of unworthiness or, in lack of ability or whatever, were sowing those seeds of doubt and causing this, missing so many opportunities, or not, somebody would offer an opportunity to do something and there would just be this immediate, no, I can't do that or whatever. And it was always talking myself out of doing things that I probably, could have done. And it was a much later realization that kind of linked the two. I just knew that there was always a persistent sense of not being good enough, of doing anything. And I knew that was hindering me from doing things. And there was a frustration at times about being hindered by doing things. But again, it comes back to that sort of cloyingly sweet sense of discomfort of being the unworthy one, of being the one who has to sacrifice themselves because they can't do the thing because they're just not good enough. And that's that self-reinforcing misery loop. But absolutely. And then there were instances though where, again, like there were a couple times in my life where I had long-term sort of really amazing connections because I listened to my gut. And, I mean, it could just, like, two very quick examples would be, I had never done busking before, where you go out and play like on a street corner. And I was doing this like experimental electronic music at this point, very, avant-garde, experimental, noisy, weird stuff. And I'm like, well, why don't I try to go out on the street corner in this little, like, suburban town, right, where, like, this is not the city of like a major, not the center of a major city or something like that, where these things are more normal. Like, nobody busks here, right? Like, it's just on this, suburban street corner, basically, where you have all these little shops. And I was initially planning on going, there was like this parking lot, and my initial thought was to go and park in this parking lot and set up. And when I got there, I just had this clear, like, nope, it's not right. And I was like, over there at that corner, like, so I got back in my car and I drove over, like, across the street, set up. And within like 10 minutes, this woman comes up to me and she goes, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, like I thought she came out of like one of the businesses and was gonna like clear me off. And I'm like, well, this is, experimental music, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I know, I'm an experimental musician and I do, experimental filmmaking and blah, blah, blah. We exchanged contact information and I ended up working with her on multiple projects. We became friends. She, she has a nonprofit and I ended up working for the nonprofit. Like, it became this huge thing for years, that just because I had this gut feeling that, no, not the location, that's the location. And then there was another instance similar to that where, one of my really close long distance friends now, she had posted on Facebook looking for she was going to make her first dance piece. And she had a piece of music that, somebody else had written. And she's like, can somebody make a piece of music that feels like this? And I happened to click on it and hear it. And ordinarily I would just be like, no. And something just went, yeah, I can do that. And I just completely uncharacteristically wrote back. And I was like, yeah, I can do that. And we have worked on, I don't remember how many projects since then. And we've been such close friends. And she has been instrumental in starting my meditation group that I run every week. So you don't know, but there are cases where the body said yes, went along with it, and it just amazing outcomes.
Amazing thing just opened. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that is also tying into the ninth theta that I love to talk about when we talk about the second theta, because it's just that flow, as soon as we allow the body yes and the body no, and just go with it, whatever we feel. And if we have any kind of mental obstruction that is telling us no, then just looking into it and allowing it to be there. It's completely fine, completely fine, completely fine. I am standing on that corner, completely fine, just being with it. And then things just fall into place, like beautifully fall into place. Yeah, love it so much. Thank you. Thank you. I think that the last thing I would like to ask you, if in the see, hear, feel flow that you have a really good description about how you can notice the thoughts, that being a flow. And I was thinking it would be a great way to end the talk that we have, because I think by now everybody knows that doubt is because of that ping pong going on between the thought and the feelings, and the guiding that you have in that. I really, really love it. So I was just thinking, if you just could outline what it is that you're doing with that exercise for anyone that is in the ping pong right now.
Thanks. Yeah. So it's so easy to get caught up in latching onto a thought and feeling like some thoughts are very sticky, and others, it's very easy to hear from a distance and be like, oh, that's, a song that I heard on the radio yesterday, and there it is playing through my head again. But then other ones feel very sticky, and they feel like they have a lot of connection to something going on in your life right now, or something that's very true about yourself or whatever. Even if you don't think you have mind identification, even if you think you're through the first fetter, some of these things still latch on. And it is what we're doing with this is just observing how, without interfering with them, thoughts arise essentially out of the ether and then dissolve back down again. And there's nothing long standing about them. There's nothing tangible about them. There's nothing that remains for more than, a brief glimpse, a brief flicker, not even seconds, because everywhere along there, it depends. We all think differently. So if you are a really verbal thinker, you're going to hear these sentences coming, but every part of that sentence is just a word in order that's being, combined into a later thought of, oh yeah, I had a thought about that time when I was 3. No, you had a series of words that were just boop, 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 and then became something afterwards by another thought, right? So it's not even like it's a you that is recognizing these things. There is a sequence of sounds in the head. There's a sequence of images in the head, especially if you're a more visual thinker. And then they're constantly gone. And so what we're doing with the see, hear, feel, flow is noticing the constant change, the constant impermanence of our experience, that there is nothing that can be latched onto. And you can even seeing these things without the labels, seeing these things from a certain perspective where, you know, we talk about getting absorbed into the sensations with see, hear, feel. And the one thing that I do want to clarify is that we're not absorbing into the thoughts and becoming identified with the thought. It's that we're being so inquisitive about the way that the thought actually materializes and shows up in experience, because they are so incredibly intangible, so you know, totally ethereal, and yet they feel like they're the most real things in so many of our worlds, because most of the time we go through our life totally unaware of the world around us. I mean, we are like at least 80% inside the head, thinking about things that haven't happened yet or that have already happened. And so all of these practices are about coming back to the moment right now, because even though a thought might be about the future or a thought might be about the past, they're always only happening right now. And so being here in this moment, just observing and really absorbing in a fascinated, curious way what the experience of those things is being right here in the present moment. So it doesn't matter the content of the thought. The content is completely irrelevant. It's just the way that the thought shows up for you in that moment. And you know, we do that in the flow practice. We do that with everything from the external world to the internal world, and notice that there is nothing in your experience ever at any moment that is stable, that you can hold on to, and that you can really, that you can rely upon for anything, you know, any sort of ultimate security, which again sounds frightening when we are clinging to something and we feel like we need a life raft in the world. But when that sense of identity is gone and there is nothing but a flow happening, there's nothing but a process that you are not even a part of. There is just flow. There's no you there. It's just this ever-changing interaction with uncountable numbers of different elements that are all together in this wonderful field that's of just movement. All of a sudden those thoughts are perfectly fine to be there. There's no attachment to them. There's nobody who can be attached to them. And you can really feel that sense of expansive completeness. Yeah.
Love it so much. Love it so much. Thank you so much. Absolutely love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have anything here last second before we end that you want to say? Your YouTube page is Unfettered Mindfulness, and I'm gonna link to it below. And you are always in the process of making new material, and you're full up with guiding people and with hosting meetings, and yeah. Anything else you would like to say before we end?
Just thank you. This has been so much fun. This has been
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, really enjoyed it.
I'm really looking forward to the next ones now.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Todd. I'm so happy. So happy. Thank you so much. Thank you.